Bible Prophecy, Signs of the End Times and the Current Coronavirus Pandemic. Hello and praise the Lord, everyone. I would like to begin by using Matthew chapter 24, verses 3 through 51 as a guideline. And I'm going to be focusing on Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 and 7 for this Bible study seminar about the coronavirus and its relationship with Bible prophecy. Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 and 7 says, "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." Verse 7, "For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places." The biblical word pestilence, used in Matthew chapter 24, verse 7, has the same meaning as the scientific description of the current coronavirus or COVID-19, which is an extremely deadly viral infection of the lungs. Let's look at the Merriam-Webster definition of the word pestilence, which means 1. A contagious or infectious epidemic disease that is virulent and devastating, especially bubonic plague. And number 2, something that is destructive or pernicious. Now let's look at the Strong's reference number for the word pestilence, which contains the original Greek word. The Strong's reference number for the word pestilence is G3061. The original Greek word for pestilence is loimos. Strong's reference definition of the word pestilence is uncertain affinity, a plague, literally the disease, or figuratively a pest. The Strong's reference number and original Greek definition of pestilence is important because it contains the curious word plague. And looking at the Merriam-Webster definition of the word plague, we see that it is defined as a virulent, contagious, febrile disease that is caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis that occurs in bubonic, pneumonic, and septicemic forms. Now finally, in looking at the definition of the word pneumonic, we see that it directly relates to the current coronavirus, COVID-19 virus. Pneumonic is defined as 1. Of relating to or affecting the lungs, pneumonic plague. 2. Of relating to or affected with pneumonia, which we know the coronavirus attacks specifically. This slide shows an overview of the current global spread of the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. Revelation chapter 6, verses 7 and 8 could also be related to the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. Revelation chapter 6, verses 7 and 8 describe the same events as Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 and 7. Revelation chapter 6, verses 7 and 8 says, "And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, Come and see." Verse 8, "And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him, and power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and the beasts of the earth." Now let's talk about the economic turmoil caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. A side effect of the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic is the economic impact and turmoil that it is causing worldwide. Economic turmoil is also predicted in end-time Bible prophecy and is related to the wars, famine, disease, and earthquakes predicted in Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 and 7. Revelation chapter 6, verses 5 and 6, ESV says, "When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, Come. And when I looked, behold, a black horse, and his rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. Now at that time a denarius was worth 1 day's wages. So Revelation chapter 6 verses 5 and 6 describe a time when the equivalent to a loaf of bread would cost an entire day's wages. This is severe economic inflation, similar to what we see happening now in Venezuela. The global economy is being severely impacted as citizens stay home, stop shopping, going to work, and curtail many of their normal activities due to the coronavirus pandemic. Governments such as the United States, Canada, are considering passing emergency economic stimulus legislation to prevent inflation and economic collapse, events that the Bible predicted in end-time prophecy. The four horsemen of the apocalypse, described in Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. The white horse, he comes to conquer. This possibly represents the Antichrist and his wars of conquest described in Daniel chapter 11. The man on the white horse is given a crown, meaning he is given supernatural power and authority to have miraculous victory and success in war. The red horse, he is given power to take peace from the world so people will kill one another. This results in tremendous global conflict and violence. He is given a crown, meaning he is given supernatural power and authority to succeed in war. The black horse, he causes economic imbalance, turmoil, depression, recession, and inflation, like nothing the world has seen before. The black horse causes global depression and recession similar or worse to what we saw in the Great Depression during the 1930s, but very, very worse. Finally, the pale or the gray horse. He is described as the embodiment or manifestation of death. He is followed by hell, which could signify the destination for many or all who are killed by him. He is given power over 1/4 or 25% of the world to kill people with hunger, death, and animals. The prophetic events and activities described by the four horsemen in Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, are the same events described in Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 through 7. The coronavirus, COVID-19, is spreading quickly around the world, but while most people are avoiding public events and using more hand sanitizer, the rich are going to more extreme measures to avoid catching the virus. The wealthy have been buying and locking themselves in emergency bunkers to avoid the coronavirus pandemic. In recent years, there's been a dramatic increase in government and private citizens, especially the rich and 1%, building bunkers. What is it that they know? Revelation chapter 6 verses 12 and 17 says, And I beheld when he had opened the 6th seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell to earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains and mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens, in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and to the rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? The Bible prophesied in Revelation chapter 6, verses 12 through 17, that the kings, great men, rich, and chief leaders would hide in the mountains, or what we today call bunkers. This would happen during end-time events. In August 7, 2019 CNN article entitled Billionaire Bunkers, How the 1% Are Preparing for the Apocalypse, details how a number of companies around the world are meeting a growing demand for these structures that protect many from risk, whether it's a global pandemic, an asteroid, World War III, while also delivering luxurious amenities. Many of these bunkers are nuclear-hardened homes which utilize abandoned Atlas missile silos that were built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that housed these nuclear warheads during the 1960s. I have a link to that article on our website. A quick search of YouTube and the internet will yield hundreds, if not thousands, of videos and articles describing how current and past pandemic, crises, emergencies, etc. have triggered government, rich private citizens, and the elite 1% to build elaborate bunkers and hide themselves. Is the current coronavirus pandemic a sign of the end times, signifying the beginning of the Great Tribulation and the rapture? Well, Matthew chapter 24, verse 7 says, For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes, and divers or different places. What we're seeing is a run-up or prologue of events leading to the end times, but not the actual signs prophesied in Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 through 7, which also coincides with the severe events predicted in Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. We know this because nations and kingdoms are not fighting or at war, as Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 through 7 say. Edit. As Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 through 7 says. Also, there is no global famine, as mentioned in Matthew chapter 24, verse 7. Also, the Antichrist has yet to rise to power and begin his military campaigns of conquest, as mentioned in Revelation chapter 6, verse 2. While debatable whether peace has been taken from the world, as mentioned in Revelation chapter 6, verses 3 through 4 says, a complete fulfillment of prophecy would lead to a severe global recession or depression where bread would cost an entire day's wages, as Revelation chapter 6, verse 5 through 7 says, and war and violence, which will lead to 1/4 or 25% of the world being killed, as Revelation chapter 6 through 7, this is yet to happen. So, the current coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic is not the complete fulfillment of the end time prophesied in Matthew chapter 24, verses 7, and Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. But it could lead to the predicted global war, famine, and economic collapse if the current pandemic continues too long. So, in answering the question, is the current coronavirus pandemic a sign of the end times that will lead to the beginning of the Great Tribulation and the rapture? Well, it's possible that it could lead to it, but as we see right now with the events happening, if this clears up in a week or weeks or a month or months, if it's over at that time, then we could probably say these are not the events that are going to lead to the Great Tribulation and the rapture, but if it continues, it could be. So the answer to the question is maybe. So what should we do? Jesus told his disciples to learn the parable of the fig tree. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender, and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh. So likewise, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Matthew chapter 24, verses 32 through 35. God is merciful and is allowing us to see a glimpse of end-time events so that we can prepare for the future that will be the full fulfillment of what the Bible has prophesied. Number 2, the generation seeing the fulfillment of end-time prophecies will see the rapture. The Bible says that the generation shall not pass till all things be fulfilled. Number 3, we see the season changing. Spiritual, moral, economic, and global events are changing, so we need to prepare spiritually, morally, and economically for the change. Number 4, righteous, born-again believers must always be ready. And finally, number 5, everyone wants to get on the ark after the flood, but few want to help build before the rain begins falling. We need to prepare and start building. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. But of the times and the seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you. For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you as a thief. Ye are all the children of light, and the children of the day. We are not of the night, nor of darkness. Therefore let us not sleep, as do others, but let us watch and be sober. The events of the end time will happen so fast, there will almost be no time to respond. Again, righteous, born-again believers must always be ready. We are seeing the beginning of the final prophetic events that will signal the end time, the rapture, and the great tribulation.
After this, the rapture. Revelation chapter 6 verses 12 through 14 ESV. When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, the full moon became like blood. Verse 13. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. Verse 14. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Matthew chapter 24 verses 29 through 31 ESV. Immediately after the tribulation of those days the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Verse 30. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Verse 31. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Matthew chapter 24 verses 6 through 7 takes place before the tribulation and the rapture. Righteous born-again believers will not see the wrath of God. Christian believers will be in heaven during the time God pours his wrath out on the earth, which are the events mentioned in Revelation chapters 8, 9, 10, 11, the seven trumpets, and chapters 15 and 16, the seven vials.